Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neal Bellon.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to jump right in. First of all, thank you for all of the support for our YouTube channel. Some of you commented on there. It's a great way to keep an active dialogue and to share your thoughts. Some of you are not on Twitter, so this is an alternative space for you to do that. I don't have a preview clip or YouTube video for every episode, but the newer ones I do, because we have about 60 episodes so far. And this is something I kind of added, but the newer episodes are on there. What I usually do is I post it on my RSS feed. You know, the episode goes live, that is, on Sundays. And then within a few days after, I post the preview clip. Now, you may say, why are you doing it in that order? Because I generally take the 1-minute preview soundbite from the finished product. So that's just how my workflow is. So it goes up live on Sunday, and then it'll be on YouTube, the preview, within the next few days. So if anyone wants to comment, they can do that. A number of you started doing that, so that's been great. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Chess Angle Podcast. There's a link below. Really appreciate your support in that regard. Now, some context for this episode. The overarching umbrella of this podcast in general is playing in USCF rated, that is United States Chess Federation rated, over-the-board events, or whatever the governing chess body is of your country that you're in. But this is about over-the-board events. That's really what this podcast is about. And when I talk about improvement, I'm talking about your over-the-board or OTB rating or FIDE, or as I said, whatever your country's governing chess body is. But it's all about live chess. But unfortunately, and this has been happening a lot, there's this new narrative, and I can't stand this if I'm being honest, where players give their online rating as their quote-unquote real rating, or they give their chess.com puzzle rating or something like that. I'm really mystified by this. Now, why am I being so harsh towards online ratings? When you play online, you really don't know what you're getting. You don't know if someone is playing while multitasking. Are you gaining rating points because they're just hanging pieces that they normally wouldn't in a live event? Are they tilting and just giving away points? Are they cheating, or are they using a bot? Like, you don't know. For example, you'll ask someone, what's your rating? Oh, well, I'm 1520 chess.com rapid. Or, I'm 1740 chess.com blitz. And you try to get out of the person what their over the board rating is, and they won't do it. They'll give you like an estimated rating, or they'll say they don't know. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, but to me, that's really what it's all about, is over-the-board chess, and you can't compare, but people are doing this. They're using their online rating as the only rating, and they're sort of hiding or being dishonest about their over-the-board rating. I guess the real point I'm saying is that people are using their online ratings, whether it's Rapid, Blitz, whatever it might be, they're using that as sort of the standard rather than an over-the-board rating, which is really what it's all about. I'm going to use an analogous thing from music. For my fellow jazz fans, we all know the great bebop trumpet player, Dizzy Gillespie. And Dizzy used to say that if he really wants to check out a musician, he'll hear him play a ballad, right, or a slow piece. Because the thinking is a ballad is very difficult. It's slow moving. You're very vulnerable when playing it. It's actually very difficult, as opposed to doing something like a 12-bar blues, which is straight ahead. So Dizzy Gillespie said, if I really want to check out a jazz musician, I'll hear him on a ballad. Well, it's the same thing with chess. The analogous thing in chess would be, if I really want to understand a player's strength and his rating or her rating, I want to know what your over-the-board rating is. That should be the standard. All right. And again, that's really what this podcast is all about. And I say that just to provide some context. At any rate, we're about amateur and club players here, adult improvers, whatever term you want to use. This podcast is not really about what's happening with the pros. Of course, that's going to come up tangentially. It's not like we're never going to discuss the pros, but we're really about club players. There's plenty of other content out there that deals with the pros and the pro level tournaments. I think the C Squared podcast is probably the best one for that. That's just my own opinion. That's an unsolicited endorsement. If you want to check that out, I do recommend it. So let's talk about classical or slow time controls at the amateur level. Now, as far as over-the-board chess, slow time controls are alive and well, and I think this talk of the quote-unquote decline of classical chess or slower time controls, this sort of doomsday scenario, is greatly exaggerated. All right, now that's from my vantage point. I'm biased. I mean, here in New York, the chess scene is big. It always has been, even before the pandemic. New York is a mecca for chess, always has been. So you need to keep that in mind. That's sort of just my bias and my background. But I think all this talk that, well, classical chess is on the way out, I think it's greatly exaggerated. And again, I'm speaking at the amateur and club level. Now let's define slow or classical time controls as it relates to amateur events. Because if you say like a classical time control, that can mean different things to different people. Now, I consider anything that's game 90 with a 5-second delay or slower to be a quote unquote classical control. I think anything faster, especially like a game 30 or a game 45, I consider that to be like junk chess as far as over the board play. All right, like a game 30 online is going to seem like forever, but as far as live games, game 30, game 45, that's junk chess, my opinion. Now, for some context and comparison, let's look at traditional, quote unquote classical time controls at major events. Now, the World Championship is 40 moves in 120 minutes, 20 moves in 60 minutes, and then sudden death in 15 minutes. And then a 30-second delay begins on move 61. All right, so that's the World Championship. Now, the FIDE standard, right, the International Chess Federation standard for slow events, other than the World Championship, is 40 moves in 90 minutes, then sudden death in 30 minutes with a 30-second delay. Now, in the CCA events, that's the Continental Chess Association. For those of you outside of the States, the CCA runs like all the major amateur events here in the States. Their standard time control is 40 moves in 80 minutes, sudden death in 30 minutes with a 30-second delay. That is as of March 2023 when I'm recording this. All right. So at the time of this recording, that's what it is. If someone listens to this, several years from now, maybe that'll change. My club's control at the Long Island Chess Club is game 90 with a 10-second delay. For a while, it was game 90 with a 5-second delay, but then we boosted it to 10 seconds. Now, I consider that a slow time control as far as over-the-board amateur events. It's slow enough that you can have a strategic game, but it's fast enough that you're not there all night. People have to work the next day. We do have kids in middle school and high school, some even younger, who play in our open events. They have school. So that's a common club time control, right? Game 90 with a 10-second delay. I like it, and it's what players want. If it were faster, I would lose members. In fact, I got rid of the dual rated and speed chess events for that reason. Even though speed chess events are rated separately, people hate fast chess. At least, the crew here on Long Island, most of the amateur players who go to the clubs, most of them do not like fast chess. And, at least that's true for most of my members. Now, dual rated, just so you know, there are some time controls where it actually can affect your regular rating and your speed rating. So I believe if the standard time control and the delay adds up to 30, then it's dual rated. So for example, if you have like game 25 with a 5-second delay, because that adds up to 30, that would be dual rated. So that would affect your regular rating and your quick rating. But if you have something like a game 15 with a 5-second delay, that would only be quick rated. But as I said, even if I had a speed chess tournament, like I used to have, it would be like a 7-round, one evening event, 10 minutes per player with a 5-second delay. So a 10-5. And like I said, we would do 6 or 7 rounds in one evening, but I wasn't getting people to show up. So most of my regulars, most of the clientele at the Long Island Chess Club do not like those quicker time controls. So the idea that classical controls are somehow declining and that, all that whole thing, not really true, at least as far as live events, right? Online is, of course, a different ecosystem. I'll talk about online chess a little bit later on in this episode. All right, but that's just some context. Now, there was a local club here on the island, which is now defunct, that had a time control. This was many years ago. It was 50 minutes with no delay, just a straight 50 minutes. And the reason was it was at a library, and the people who ran the library said that, they had to leave when the library closed. They wouldn't let them stay after. So they were on a strict schedule. So it was 50 minutes with no delay, and Rule 14H wasn't allowed. Now, what Rule 14H is, they pretty much got rid of it. It used to be in the rule book, and this was before time delay. Rule 14H was basically you could claim a draw by insufficient losing chances. So, for example, if you had a king and a rook and your opponent has a king and a rook, you could claim a draw because if given ample time, your opponent would not be able to beat you. Like, you would hold a draw. Like, the standard would be for this Rule 14H, would a 1400 player be able to hold the draw against a master? So if you were about to run out of time, you could claim a draw by Rule 14H. I believe that's how it worked. I haven't dealt with that in a while. Now, the reason I'm, sort of half remembering it is because, number one, that's no longer in the rule book, I believe. And number two, even when it was in the rule book, once you had time delay instituted, Rule 14H wasn't allowed because the whole idea was that the delay would give you time to hold the draw. I went on a little bit of a tangent there. What's my point? Because it was 50 minutes with no delay, they had almost no members because that was just too fast for people. They were lucky to have 4 to 6 players show up on a regular basis. And then if people took buys, they would have maybe just 2 games going. People don't want to play game 45 with no delay in an over-the-board tournament. People don't want to play game 60 even with no delay. All right, this is just sort of my world and what I've experienced here on Long Island. And I know this is true for a lot of clubs, here in the States. That being said, all amateur tournaments, as far as I'm concerned, should use a sudden death time control. In other words, not these multiple controls where it's like 40 and 90 and then, 40 and 80, whatever it is. Just have it as a sudden death time control, meaning each player has a set amount of time for the whole game, right? That's what sudden death is. Like game 90. That's it. Each player has 90 minutes with the delay, whatever it is, done. Or game in 2 hours. Or game in 75, with a delay, of course. It's just easier. You don't have to worry about move numbers. There's less problems for the players, less confusion. There's less issues for the TD. TD interference is usually not needed. It's just so much more sensible. Like, again, our club is game 90 with a 10-second delay. Beautiful. Nice and simple. You have 90 minutes with a 10-second delay to make all your moves. Done. I'd now like to share some tips for these quote-unquote club-level classical time controls, such as game 90 with a 10-second delay, game 75 with a 10-second delay, even game 60 with a 10-second delay. Like I said, anything quicker than game 90, I'm not a fan of, but I think we can still consider that to be a classical, club-level time control as opposed to like these game 30s. So when you have something like a game 90 or a game 75, you do have time to think. But on the other hand, you do have to balance. So here are some just tips, some things that I would suggest for these club level controls. Number one, you need to make a decision and you can't obsess. You can't take like 6-7 minutes over like minutia. Like, do I take back with this or this? Obviously you got to check the tactics, but you need to make a move. Like, don't obsess. Number two, and this is a big thing with me, have a set opening repertoire. Figure out your openings, experiment, and then once you figure out what your repertoire is, stick with those same openings. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you analysis. This way you can use your clock later in the game when you really need to think. So have a set opening repertoire. Number three, this goes a little bit along with number one about making a decision. You need to avoid perfectionism and not beat yourself up that every move is not perfect. At the club level, we're playing at night. It's after work. We have things on our mind. We're distracted. The games are going to be a little ugly and a little scrappy. Like, you just have to understand that. Like, that's how it is. In fact, my game this week was a perfect example of that. I was playing someone else around my own rating, and it was an English opening. He played C4, I played B6. It got a little crazy in the center. Now, I'll admit, he took it in a different direction. I wasn't sure what to do. I missed something. He was definitely better. He had like this nasty pin on my knight, and I somehow defended very well. But I mean, it was ugly. He was better, and then I was better. But it turns out he looked at it in the computer. I didn't look at it yet. It turns out he was actually still a little bit better at the end. I managed to get a draw. We ended up both in a bit of a time scramble, and it was a very wild position. He offered a draw. I took it. Now, I thought maybe I had a little bit of an endgame advantage because he had some weak pawns. Like, that's just the direction it went in. He had an attack early on. But the point is, because it's a club time control, I mean, game 90 is slow, but it's not that slow. There are going to be times where I may have to take a draw or I may have to make some decisions, because even if I see a win, if I'm so low on time, that's not enough to figure out, the correct moves. Like, I might know thematically what to do, but actually doing it on the board is difficult, especially when your opponent has some counterplay. So I guess when I say avoid perfectionism, just understand that at the club level, when you're playing with these time controls and it's at night, it's after work, whatever it is, the games are going to be a little ugly because you're not really going in there with a full tank, right? You're kind of playing on fumes. And then towards the end of the game, it might be like 10:30 at night. That's tough after a hard day at work. So the games are going to be a little ugly, like I said. The next thing, as far as handling these club level time controls, keep it simple. Don't enter unnecessary complications if you don't know what the follow-up is going to be. Just play straightforward moves. You'd be surprised how effective it is. The next thing, I'm stealing from a great book, Secrets of Practical Chess by John Nunn. I'll put a link for a classic book. He has an acronym in there, DAUT, that's D-A-U-T, don't analyze unnecessary tactics. Love that. Absolutely love that. DAUT, don't analyze unnecessary tactics. So, because what happens is you think you see something, and then you spend 5, 6, 7 minutes looking at it only to realize either A, it doesn't work, or B, you're not sure because you can't see it through. And then you end up playing something else. And in the meantime, you just torched 7 minutes on your clock for no reason, which can come back to bite you later. So in those club time controls, game 75, maybe something like that, whatever it is, if you don't see it, you got to move on, because you're just going to end up losing time. So I love that. Don't analyze unnecessary tactics. Great one. And last thing I would say is just awareness. Just be aware of your clock. Try not to fall behind, because in a game 90 or a game 75, something like that, if, you start to get like 12, 15 minutes behind your opponent, that can, and that's consistent throughout the game, that can cause you problems later on. So be aware of your clock. And again, you got to make decisions. Don't be a perfectionist. And, clock management is a big thing. And that might mean that maybe you're not playing the theoretically best move, but you're playing an adequate move. And that's okay. And games are won that way. So those are just some things to think about at the club level with those types of controls. Now let's talk about speed chess at the amateur level. Now, this section on speed chess, and this whole episode really, was prompted by a listener, Chris, from the UK. And by the way, shout out to our friends across the pond in the UK, because we have quite a few listeners from there. We really appreciate it, right? So shout out to you guys. And Chris, I appreciate you listening to the podcast, and thank you for your question. So here is Chris's email. I have 2 questions for you. I'm in the UK. My rating is 1634. How does the UK rating compare with the US and FIDE? Secondly, is speed chess ruining the game? I feel it is. I've heard top players saying to win, just block the center and win on time. Not always easy for amateurs, I know. I much prefer watching longer time controls to see people have to think and play the best moves. Short format just seems to be who blundered the least, but who played the best. I don't play short games either. Probably I'm not good enough at seeing the patterns. So that's some good stuff there, Chris. Now, I'm going to take those separately. The US versus UK in FIDE is interesting. Now, honestly, I'm not qualified to give a solid answer on that because I'm not very well traveled. But maybe someone who's spent time in both countries can say, maybe someone can shoot me an email. Now, I know here in the US, there's definitely some rating deflation going on because of the chess boom. And you have a lot of players, especially kids with ratings that haven't caught up to their strength, for example. So you're playing someone who's rated 1,000, quote unquote 1,000, but they're really like 1,600. I've spoken about that before ad nauseum, but that's something that's going on in this country, the rating inflation. I'm not sure what's going on elsewhere, but it's an interesting thing to think about. As far as just block the center and win on time, yeah, I pretty much do that all the time with the London system, right? Just pop the knight on E5, lock it in with F4, and my opponent runs out of time because he doesn't know what to do. Well, I'm just kidding. Well, not really. It sort of does work that way sometimes. No, but seriously, as far as your comment with speed chess, yeah, there's probably some validity to that, especially when you're not playing with an increment. If you're doing like a 5-0 or a 3-0 and the center is locked and your opponent doesn't know what to do, yeah, he may just lose on time. So there's probably some truth to that. Now, the meat of your question, as far as I see it, or the meat of your email is speed chess ruining the game? And that's a great question. Let me look at both sides of this. And I suspect if you were to ask 10 different chess players that question, you might get 10 different answers, or there would definitely be a split across the middle. But here's my take on this, Chris. So I do think speed chess has its place and can be beneficial in moderation. I think it's going to benefit some people more than others. Now, it does have its place, and when used judiciously, it can be helpful. Now, by speed chess, let's get some definitions here. I'm referring to something like 5-0 or 5-3 or slower. Bullet chess, like 1-0 or even those like 3-0 games, that's nonsense. That's junk chess. Those controls are just utterly ridiculous. I like to play 5-minute games with a 5-second delay, but nobody wants to play that. Like, I'll put that in on chess.com. I will not get any opponents. And then when I change it to 5-0, I get a game instantly. I do recommend always using an increment. Okay. I think you should play with an increment, like a 5-second increment, 3 seconds, something like that. Now, occasionally, and I do this myself, I think some 5-0 is good, like a standard blitz control, 5 minutes with no delay occasionally. But as a general rule, I do recommend using the increment. All right. But what you said before about just, blocking the center and having your opponent lose on time, if you're not playing with an increment, that's probably a strategy that will work. I've heard some titled players say that playing speed chess for hours a day helped them improve, but I'm not convinced that's the right thing for most amateur players, especially adult improvers. Now, what they don't tell you, because remember, when we hear all this chess advice, there's always what they tell you and what they don't tell you. So what they don't tell you, in my opinion, is that a lot of these players who sort of have a reputation of improving through playing speed chess, they probably already had a lot of innate talent going in. Like, you hear all the stories about Hikaru and Magnus and all the speed chess that they played and how they used the computer a lot. I think Hikaru was known for like playing against the computer a lot, if I'm remembering that correctly. But they were probably already talented going in. So is their success really because of playing a lot of speed chess or in spite of it? I mean, I'm sure the experience of playing tons of games helped them, but I'm not sure you can attribute that as the main reason for success. I don't know. But I'll say this, okay? Let's keep it real here. Look at the thousands, I don't know, millions, but definitely thousands of amateur players and adult improvers, including those who are extremely serious about improving, who have played hundreds or thousands of speed games and have seen minimal or no improvement. So the idea of getting better by playing speed chess all day, if that were true, the overwhelming majority of players on chess.com wouldn't be rated below 1,200 or whatever it is. And even over the board players, would probably have higher ratings, if that practice helps them. So I don't think you can really say universally that playing speed chess for hours a day is going to help you just because it helps some super GMs that we know. Because again, you have thousands and thousands of players who are playing several hours a day. They have the time to do it. And like I said, they're seeing minimal to no improvement. Now, speed chess does have some benefits, though, as I said earlier. Now, if you want to check out episode 31 of this podcast with National Master Tyrell Harriott, you may want to do that. In that episode, he gives the benefits of speed chess, which he's a big advocate for. So speed chess, obviously, it can help with tactics and recognizing those patterns. It'll help with clock management, because if you don't manage your clock, you're going to lose every game on time. Playing in time pressure, it helps with practice playing in time pressure, because even in slow time controls, you are going to face time pressure situations despite your best efforts. So you should get some practice, because even those club controls like the game 90s, you're still going to get in time pressure. As much as you might not want to, it's going to happen. So you do need some practice. The other thing with speed chess, it's good to practice openings. You can go through a lot of openings, just do a lot of practice games. And another big thing, speed chess is very convenient from a scheduling point of view, especially if you're playing without an increment. So for example, if you play a 5-0 game, it's going to be 10 minutes max. So if you're on a lunch break or you're on a break at work, right? Because, some people, from what I've heard, like they only play at work, right? What's that old thing? Like, is their home life is so busy, right? I go to work to relax, right? They actually can't get a break at home. I've heard, people say that. So if you're the type of person, like, you really treasure your lunch hour at work or your coffee break at work, I mean, who doesn't, right? The nice thing about playing a speed game without a delay is that you can finish in time, right? So if you have a 30-minute break, you can play at least 2 games and have some time to spare. So like I said, from a scheduling point of view, playing the speed game without an increment is a big deal for some people. Speed chess also has an aesthetic appeal. People like that they can fit in a lot of games in one sitting. The immediacy and quickness of getting a result is appealing to many, right? You're either going to win, lose, or draw, but it happens pretty quickly. You're not sitting there for 4 hours. It's much easier to play a quick game on your phone. And speed chess sort of fits, quote unquote, it fits playing online better than slow games, because you're staring at a screen versus playing over the board. Like playing a 30-minute game in person, right? It doesn't seem like it's that long, but that's an eternity. When you're playing a 30-minute game online, that's an eternity. So the speed games kind of fit the whole sort of logistics of looking at a computer or a tablet or a phone. And lastly, the excitement of speed chess attracts new fans, right? Because it's quick, it moves. And I mean, let's face it, if you're following a slow tournament live, it can be boring. There can be a lot of dead spots. So speed chess is exciting, brings new people into the game. Now, there are some downsides to playing speed chess and blitz. Now, there's something I call the blitz spiral. And I am sure I'm not the first person to say this or say something similar to this. Here's what happens. We've all gone through it. I know you've gone through it as well. Here's what happens, right? And this is why I don't play a lot of blitz games online. You start playing some games online, right? You're on chess.com, great, right? You start playing some games, and then 2 things generally happen. You either start winning a number of games or you start to lose some games. Could be some combination of both, but generally it goes in one direction or other. So what do? Rather than discipline ourselves and say, okay, I've been playing for 45 minutes, I've been playing for an hour, let me kind of step away from it. It was a good session. And maybe analyzing some of those games you played, which you should really do. What do? If you keep winning, oh, I'm on fire, right? I'm on fire. I need to keep going, right? And if you lose, you're like, oh, I need to win my rating points back, right? But then what happens is if you play because you keep winning and you're on fire, eventually you are going to start losing games, right? And we're not Hikaru, we're not Magnus, right? We can only handle so much. So either way, it's going to get to a point where it's clearly time for you to, end the session because you're starting to lose it. So it gets to that point where you start to lose games. And we don't stop because, like I said, when you keep winning games, you feel like you're on a roll and you want to keep going. And then when you start losing games, you kind of want to play catch up. But either way, it gets to a point where you start losing games because you insist on continuing the session. And then here's what happens, right? You start tilting and then you lose more games and then you like quit. I'm going to, cancel my account. I'm not going to do this again. And then it's like rinse, cycle, repeat. I think you know what I'm talking about. And the way to avoid that is, you have to kind of put a time limit on it and just walk away and come back. I mean, here's the point. Online chess is highly addicting. It really is. And most of us don't know when to stop. Over the board events, which is what I'm all about, eliminates that. So this whole thing of like this blitz spiral of you play some games and then if you win, you keep going. If you lose, you keep going for the reasons I mentioned. And then you get to a point where you just start losing games and then you get, you know the deal. That's really an online phenomenon because over the board, it's just different. I mean, yes, people tilt over the board in tournaments too, especially if you're not having one, but not to the degree you do online. And if you're playing in a club event, it's generally one game per week. So you kind of have a week to sort of just like shake it off if you had a bad game and then you jump back into it fresh. But that whole blitz spiral, what I just described, I hope I described it, in a way that you understand, but I think you know what I mean. That's just very, very common. So that's one of the problems with speed chess. Now, the other issue with speed chess is very often it's too superficial and you're not working on deep strategic thinking. It's all about tactics and just making moves rather than plans and ideas. Now, I know some stronger players are going to say, well, that's not true. Even in speed chess, there's planning. I get it, but I think for most adult improvers, it's going to hurt those habits, right? The deep strategic thinking and understanding plans and themes and structures. I don't think speed chess is going to help most adult improvers in that regard. And the last thing, this might be the most important thing, it takes away from study time because of its addictive nature. Because I bet you've done this. You say, okay, I have an hour before bed, whatever it is. I have an hour before I need to do whatever, right? And I'm going to play Blitz just for 20 minutes. I'm just going to play a few 5-0 games just for 20 minutes. And then you end up torching the whole hour playing Blitz, right? Because you were just going to play a few Blitz games and then study, but that never happens. Whereas instead, you could have taken that hour to do like some lessons on chess.com or a Chessable type thing, and that would have been so much more productive. Last thing I'm going to say about speed chess and quick games, this is kind of a side note. I think it's repugnant. I'm really bothered by this, that they use quick games as tie breaks for the world championship. Now, I know someone's going to say, well, they have to do that because they're going to keep drawing. I don't know, maybe find a way, but I just don't like that there's a chance it can be decided by quick games. It just doesn't seem right, because if you have one player who's a stronger speed chess player than the other one, should that really determine who's world championship? I don't know. But I know that they do that as tie breaks. That always bothers me when the world championship comes around. Just my own opinion. I think it should be all slow games. Find a way to make it work. To use quick games as tie breaks for something as important as the world championship, I got a problem with that. I now want to discuss some of my favorite chess.com lessons. Now, some are more difficult than others, but all club players will definitely benefit from these. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of my favorites. There's a lot more on there as well. Now, if you ask me, and I've mentioned this before, the chess.com lessons are probably the most underutilized resource online, or at least one of them. I mean, you're paying for a chess.com diamond membership, whatever it is, $100 a year. Get your money's worth. Instead of mindlessly playing Blitz all the time, you should check some of these out. So I'm going to start with a few on openings. Now, of course, I'm biased towards my own openings, but for my fellow London players, the London system for the busy chess player by Simon Williams is excellent. It's a fantastic introduction. He goes through the basics and the G6 systems, the D5 systems. There's a great game he looks at where Magnus plays the London, but in a positional way, where he does these trades and then goes into a winning endgame, almost very Fischer-like, like transposing to a winning ending. Really, really well done. So that is the London system for the busy chess player by Simon Williams. He probably has the best London system stuff out there. And same guy, Simon Williams, also has Why Simon Loves the French Defense. So if you play the French, he goes through the whole thing, the advanced variation, the exchange, the universal system. He has all these different ideas. He does odds and ends at the end, like if white sort of plays these unconventional responses to the French. So that's a good one. And then turning to my guy, I am Jeremy Silman. He has one that I'm working on now. I'm just laughing. I started it ages ago. I keep getting distracted, but it's called Now What, right? By I am Jeremy Silman. It's basically after the opening phase is finished and you're in the middle game, like, what do you do? And he has these positions and you have to figure out the correct strategic plan. Really, really well done. Another great one by Silman. This one's very challenging and it might be too tough for beginners, but you might want to check it out. It's called Roots of Positional Understanding. And he goes through all of these thematic ideas of positional play. Some are harder than the others, but the explanations are excellent. It's a little intense, but it's very, very good. Another one for sort of beginner and intermediate players is Build Your Technique by F.M. Thomas Wolski, where he talks about, pins and the Philidor draw, and all these different tactical patterns. He talks about openings. It's kind of an array of different thematic ideas to build your technique. But if you're a sort of a beginner or an advanced beginner, even an intermediate player, it's really, really good. Another one is called Chess Potpourri, which has, something for everybody. There's opening traps, combinations, end games, positional challenges. This one is listed for those between 1,200 and 1,500, but it even says that many are at the expert level and above. So I think regardless of your rating, this Chess Potpourri one will help you. That's from the chess.com team. Really, really good. I'm trying to give you ones that, are good for the vast majority of amateur players. Another one, this one is fantastic. Pawn Endings, Beginner to Expert. It goes through everything, the opposition, the diagonal opposition, the square of the pawn, all the basic king and pawn ending ideas that you need to know. It's all in here. Beautiful, beautiful lesson. Pawn Endings, Beginning to Expert. The next one, also by Silman, Rook and Other Endgames. He goes through all of it, like rook versus pawn, king and rook versus king and two connected pawns, because there are certain situations where if you have two connected passed pawns, that can beat the rook. He goes through all that essential theory. And this way, when you get into your end games, you'll know, if it's winning or if it's drawing and what the proper plan is. So it's all these different rook endings. That's, once again, Rook and Other Endgames by I am Jeremy Silman. Now, what I'm going to do, because I'm kind of going through this, I'm going to list these and link all these up in the episode description. So no worries, it'll be all there for you, nice and organized. The last three have to do with tactics. Now, there's a zillion tactical ones on the chess.com lessons. They're all good, but these are three you may want to start with. The first one is Introduction to Tactics. This is tremendous. If you're just getting into the game, if you're close to, if you're more of a beginner, you definitely want to go through this one. It's all the basics about winning pieces, attacking trapped pieces, pins, skewers, forks, it's pretty much everything. All right, so that's Introduction to Tactics. Then the next step up from that one, it's called Intermediate Tactics, which basically is just that. It kind of takes it a step further, deals with combination, discovered attacks, forks, pins, counter threats, attacking h7, how to avoid traps. Great stuff. And then the next one, the last one I'm going to mention, is Step Up in Tactics, which is just that. It's a little more advanced. So if you go through the first through Introduction to Tactics and then Intermediate Tactics, you can then do Step Up in Tactics. And of course, it continues. There's Advanced Tactics. But I think those three, if you're just kind of starting out, if you're sort of an adult beginner or maybe an advanced beginner, do Introduction to Tactics, Intermediate Tactics, and Step Up in Tactics. I recommend them. And if you're doing other tactical puzzles already, you can, still stick with that. But if you're looking to use chess.com lessons, these are some of the ones that I recommend. And I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I think this is a severely underutilized feature and just a great learning tool. I mean, this is fantastic. If I have an hour, I'm going to do one of these lessons. I'm not just going to play, blitz, or, I try not to. I mean, I do play online, not that much, but, a lot of the time I just feel something like this is much more productive. All right, so that's going to do it for this week. As always, I really appreciate you listening. There was a lot of information in this episode, so any books I mentioned, all those chess.com courses, all that stuff, I'm going to put links for everything. So no worries, you don't got to write it down. Everything will be there for you. So check out those chess.com lessons. I think they're really underutilized. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Really appreciate it. Keep those 5-star reviews coming on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's greatly appreciated. Really appreciate the support. I also want to continue the reader mailbag segment. I think it's kind of a cool thing to add. So if you do have a question or a topic idea that you want considered, shoot me an email at info@thechessangle.com. There's links for that. You can also hit me up on Twitter @thechessangle. Or you can make a comment on our YouTube channel, because I do read those, I do see those, but we really appreciate it. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.